Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Iga. I'm the Policy and Products Coordinator at the Settlement Council of Australia, SCOA. And I'm here today with SCOA CEO Maria Demopoulos and our guest speaker, Melanie Raj. Before we begin, let me just start with an acknowledgement that we are meeting on lands that have been stolen without the treaty or consent, and that we continue to benefit from those colonial systems and structures established on unceded lands. And I am joining from the lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people. In today's discussion, we are building on our last webinar where we introduced intersectionality as a theory. And if you haven't seen it yet, it is on the SCOA's YouTube channel, so check it out. And in today's conversation, we focus on how intersectionality can be applied in practice across the settlement sector. And in this discussion, we explore how the Australian Multicultural Women's Alliance, AMWA, applies intersectional lens in its advocacy and leadership, and what it means for settlement practitioners working with migrant refugee women. And today I'm joined by Melanie, the Executive Director of AMWA, and also one of the SCOA's board members. Melanie or Maria, would you like to add anything before I jump into the first question?
Oh, can I just say it's always such an honour, Melanie. We have known each other for a while now, and apart from me needing to be extra nice to you because you are on my board, can I just say what your leadership, your contribution to this sector, your knowledge and wisdom, it's just it's been such a huge asset to our movements, our organisations. So we feel really honoured that you've agreed to do this. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and always happy to support the work that SCOA's doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, okay, let's get started. AMWA has emerged as a national voice for multicultural women. How do you see AMWA's role alongside the settlement sector, and what gaps is it trying to address?
Thanks, Iga. So I guess I see AMWA as both a bridge and an amplifier within the ecosystem. So settlement organisations, they're doing incredible work on the front line every day. They are the first point of contact for migrant and refugee women navigating complex systems like housing or employment or family violence support, health services and settlement programs. But I guess what AMWA brings is that ability to connect those lived experience and frontline insights into that national policy conversation. So I guess historically what we're seeing is migrant and multicultural women's voices have been often fragmented or underrepresented in some of these national gender policy conversations. And at the same time, mainstream women's policy spaces don't always fully account for the realities of the migration system, like visa status or racism or language barriers or settlement pathways. And AMWA exists to close that gap. So we work with organisations across the settlement sector, and our role is really to elevate community insights into these national policy discussions and connect those grassroots experience with evidence and research, and then advocate for those systemic solutions across the portfolios, because the challenges faced by migrant and refugee women rarely sit within one single policy area. Like they sit across immigration and employment and health and family violence and education and social policy. So I guess AMWA's role is to ensure that these intersecting realities are visible in policy design, and that also that multicultural women are really not treated as an afterthought or an add-on, but they're really central to Australia's social and economic future.
Yeah, definitely. You refer to intersectionality a lot. I had to look at your website before. And intersectionality is obviously, we introduce it as a theory, but it can mean different things in practice. So I was wondering, how does AMWA define intersectionality, and how does that shape the way you advocate for migrant and refugee women?
Thanks. So I guess So for us, intersectionality, yeah, it's not just a theory. It's like a practical lens for understanding how systems interact in people's lives. So at its core, intersectionality really recognizes that people experience barriers not just because of one identity. It's because of multiple factors, and also how those factors intersect, combine, compound, etc. So for example, for migrant and refugee women, this might include gender, migration pathway or visa status, race and ethnicity, language barriers, disability, caring responsibilities, socioeconomic circumstances. So in practice, that means that policy solutions designed around a single issue, they just miss the full picture. So, for example, an employment policy that focuses only on gender may not consider overseas qualifications, recognition, language barriers, childcare access, visa restrictions, discrimination in hiring, which all are impacting migrant and refugee women. So I guess at AMWA, we imply this intersectionality by asking, like in every policy conversation, like, I guess, who is missing from the solution? And if the answer is, migrant and refugee women or other marginalised groups, then we know that the policy design needs to go further. And often we sit around these policy tables and we don't see anyone who looks like us or who has that experience from, settlement, etc. So intersectionality and understanding that there are multiple factors helps us move from that generic inclusion to targeted and equitable solutions. And it recognises that equality doesn't always mean treating everyone the same, but it's designing systems that, I guess, reflect the reality of people's lives.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess you already touched on that a little bit, but I was wondering if you could share an example of AMWA's work where applying intersectional lens changed the policy conversation or the solution being proposed.
Sure. So I guess the clearest example at the current moment is that the work that we're doing on migrant women's economic participation in skills recognition. So Australia has like a significant number of highly skilled migrant workers, women who arrive with degrees, very qualified, professional experience, extremely strong capabilities, yet they consistently are underemployed or excluded from the workforce. And so if we looked at this purely through a gendered lens, we might focus on, general workforce participation initiatives. But AMWA, we conducted a survey because we really wanted to understand what was happening beneath the surface, like that disconnect between the narrative of skill shortages and all these highly skilled migrant workers who are, not working at their skill level, but they're working in jobs, survival jobs or jobs that lower paid care work, etc. So and we really centered the voices of migrant and refugee women during this survey. And what came through very strongly was that that's not a single issue problem. It's a layering of systemic barriers. So it's like, overseas qualifications not being recognised, lack of local networks and professional connections, or needing local experience, or language barriers and confidence impacts, visa restrictions, limiting working opportunities, then that caring responsibilities of, not only caring like for the immediate family, but multi-generational, intergenerational and transnational care, lack of flexible pathways, and then the bias and discrimination in recruitment. So, and then beyond the surface level barriers, like we can say these are all the barriers, but what the stories behind them really truly reflected the intersectionality and the layered impact. So, highly qualified women like engineers or accountants or health professionals, they spoke about the emotional impact of starting again, of losing professional identity, of navigating systems that don't recognise their value, and, the kind of compounding impact they have not only on the family, the community, etc. So, and that's where that really intersectional lens really becomes critical, because it's not just about the employment. It sits at the intersection of, migration policy, of education, of skills recognition, of health, of labour markets, of, gendered norms, of care responsibilities, social inclusion. So this work, we are launching a report soon. And we want to elevate both the data and also the lived experience into policy conversations, so you can see, you know, so where are the gaps, but what is the true impact of this intersectionality per se of all these intersecting barriers. So, and that's shifting the narrative to, you know, why aren't migrant women participating in the workforce, to what systemic and structural barriers are preventing Australia from fully utilising the talent. So, and then it becomes not a diversity conversation, it becomes an economic and social conversation. So, and then that will shift the types of solutions to be proposed. So instead of isolated programs, we're seeing, like, you know, the need for more coordinated skills recognition pathways, employer engagement, targeted employment programs, recognition of care responsibilities and the definition of care, and stronger alignment between, you know, migration, education and workforce. So I guess intersectionality really just it doesn't just deepen the understanding, but it leads to more effective system solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive answer. And I think, as you said, it's really important to remember that it's never just one thing, but it's all compounded.
And then all these, I mean, intersectionality, it applies to all of our focus areas, like health. I could give you an example of gender-based violence in leadership. Like, it's all, there's never one thing, and they can't also, there's multiple things, but it can never be also seen in isolation, those multiple things. They interact, they compound, and then no one person's story is also the same as well. So it's also has to be considered as well. Like, there's no one story that's the same, even if it's the same problem or the same issue. So yeah,
thank you. And I think when we talk about intersectionality, we also talk about shifting power or sharing power, and AMWA places strong emphasis on lived experience, as you just mentioned, lived experience leadership. How does this go beyond consultation and actual shift power within advocacy and decision making? I think you've already touched a bit of that, but if you had anything to add.
I mean, I think it's shifting to really value lived experience, or even it's lived expertise, really, because it's expertise in those, you know, strategy conversations. It's very complex what these women have in terms of, you know, navigating multiple systems, etc. So, and sometimes it's all reduced to consultation at the end of the process. My pet hate, but end of the process, but really needs to be right at the beginning, core critical part of shaping the process. And that's what we're advocating for, you know, like women who are at the coalface or living these realities every day, to be valued and seen and compensated and resourced for sharing their experience, not just simply as feedback. And so I guess that means several things, like, you know, firstly, our engagement is informed by ongoing engagement with multicultural women and community organisations. So forming that relationship, we're building a member base. We've got these thematic working groups, and we will have multiple ways for us to gather those insights, not from the usual voices, but from the corners of the community, from the diverse communities, because we know that each community, things manifest in different ways, things show up in different ways. And I'm not the expert, so I need to make sure that we hear those voices and that people can see that we are the national voice and we're representing them and they feel heard. Secondly, many of the voices that contribute to our work are leaders within their community, and they understand both the lived realities and the structural barriers within the system. So treat them as such, and also, you know, they are professionals in their own right. So, and they're also doing some of the heavy lifting and filling gaps, which is not resourced by government. So we want to make sure that those are elevated, and we aim to create platforms where multicultural women are visible as experts, whether in policy discussions, research, public conversations, or leadership spaces. Sharing stories is critical to our, you know, policy advocacy and, you know, some of our submissions. So I guess shifting that power from speaking about communities to creating spaces where community is a core central part of shaping the agenda. So we no longer want women to be, you know, just part of the conversation. We want them to be in the rooms where the decisions are made and heard and have a voice, not just a seat at the table, but have a voice. Because I think when women with lived expertise and experience are part of the policy conversation, that's when the solutions are more relevant, more effective, more sustainable, and make sense, and often less costly than what would have been developed without them. So I think it's really important that we shift that power dynamic to the people who actually know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Melanie, Iga, can I ask? I mean, that's a really good question about power, and I can't sit still for too long, but I've really been listening deeply. Part of the conversation that I've been having too, when we talk about power sharing, is I'm realising that there's not a lot of power literacy that's out there. Like we actually don't understand through that intersectional lens what power looks like, what power disparity looks like, and what power sharing looks like. So I started talking these days about power literacy.
Yes.
Is that something that you know is part of that conversation when you talk about shifting power, and Iga's question is such a critical one? Is that part of the conversation as well?
Yeah. So I think that we also want to, especially in that leadership pillar, like, get these women who are the experts at their story to be able to get the tools and skills to articulate that in a way, in that kind of sense, to feel confidence to do so, but then understand the dynamics and understand. But then it also comes from both ends. Any of these things is, like, we can equip these multicultural women with all the skills and tools to be able to speak and understand that dynamic, but the dynamic has to play as well. And so they need to be able to go, okay, look, it's not giving up your power. It's not, because I think it's sometimes thinking it's like someone gains, someone loses. Everyone wins.
Exactly.
By having more perspectives in the room, different perspectives. So I think that historically it's, like evidence, like data equals, it's strategic, etc. But lived experience is emotional. So it's got to move from, it's not just emotional, but it is actually critical to shaping a solution that will actually work, which benefits the government, increases productivity, more bang for your buck. So I think it's but you're right. Like, I think it's understanding the power dynamic will allow you to navigate it easier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, like, for everyone listening, for our members, for people working in the settlement sectors, what are some practical ways they can embed all that we're talking about now, intersectionality and power sharing, all those things into their work? Like, do you have any advice for people working in the sector? Like, where do we start? What do we do?
I mean, I think that in the settlement sector, like, already deeply embedded in the issues, or already doing a lot of this stuff intuitively. But I think that to strengthen the work, designing programs with multiple barriers in mind. So when you're designing services, considering how different factors interact, language access, childcare, transport, digital access, visa status. And if you don't know, ask the people who are beneficiaries from your service, and that constant kind of communication, continuous improvement, iteration, to understand how things change, because there's different levers, different kind of macro factors that impact how services are accessed. So I think it's just important when you're designing, but then also that constant iteration. But programs designed with several barriers simultaneously, they are more effective. And I also think at AMWA, we are looking at our member base, individuals, organisations, grassroots organisations in the gender sector, the multicultural sector, combined peak bodies. We're also looking at allies, which are men, and also other organisations who are like in cross-sector, so corporates, government, philanthropy, etc. So I think that when we're talking about solutions like these, which have got so many systemic and structural barriers that intersect with so many things, we can't solve it within one sector. So, and no single organisation can address every barrier. So strong partnerships with, settlement organisations, women's services, health providers, employment programs, community groups, corporates, philanthropy can help create more holistic responses as well. So looking beyond your immediate sphere of interaction, and then, using lived experience and expertise is a guiding principle. I think everyone in the sector knows that in theory, but how do you involve advisory groups, community leadership pathways, co-design processes where community members help shape programs and policies, but also that feedback loop? Like, a lot of people put in to, different advisory, but they don't know where their insights have gone. So I think that will provide them with a little bit of ownership. Is like, hey, like, I put something in and it was taken on board and it changed the program here, and they're also more likely to buy into the program in the end. And then one of the biggest ones that we're advocating for across is, better data, disaggregated data. If we don't have data, then it's invisible in policies. So intersectional data helps us identify how different groups are experiencing systems. So, and it's much harder to design effective solutions without that visibility. And I know that's not just a silver bullet, and I know that can't be done overnight, but just thinking about how we can collect data, obviously with all the privacy considerations, etc., and, communicating why you're collecting data, but as much data as we can have, then that will help also with advocacy as well. Because when you see in advocacy, we have qualitative, a lot of stories, but if it was backed up by data, it would be, even more powerful. And then I guess I would say, investing in leadership pathways, a lot of multicultural women, migrant women who are coming, they're leading in communities, they're leading in volunteer roles because they can't get the local qualifications recognised, so they're doing volunteer roles. So making sure that is valued in leadership when they're applying for, more corporate roles or more kind of other roles, creating the pipeline of leadership and board spaces. So, because decision making really needs to reflect the communities that we serve. And, we need to see the full picture of people's lives when designing responses, and strategy is developed at the board table. So if we don't have those voices and that leadership pathway in those board tables, then we're not going to get the decisions that are fit for purpose for the community. So I think, the settlement sector, it's got amazing potential to lead in so many spaces in this work. Because engaging with the community in that intersection, in all their intersections every day, and so firsthand how those interplay and intersect. So I think that being conscious of that and elevating those stories into the national policy conversations is also very important.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think all the examples that you just provided really show that like intersectionality is not just this like abstract theory, but it's actually embedded into the sector and like everyday reality. Before we wrap up, Maria, did you have any further questions?
There are so many questions that
Yeah.
I could ask, but I know that we always have limited time. I was going to say though that intersectionality at the same time can actually create an expectation in terms of accountability. The assumption, I think, that it's an easy process is it's not.
It's not.
Intersectionality does require us to ask hard questions, as you rightly pointed out, about who holds power, who gets to speak, who doesn't speak. And sometimes there is an assumption, don't you think, in our sector that by virtue of our status as migrant, refugee, multicultural, that intersectionality is something that we apply out there, not internally, not to our own organisations. But I think it's important to recognise that it's a useful tool to apply in any context.
Definitely.
And our organisations in particular. And when we do that to some extent we have to be prepared to have courageous conversations because it will raise challenging questions. It will mean that there are groups within our communities that are often silenced, that are often sort of further disempowered or disengaged by virtue of the very same assumptions that, you know, we accuse others of making. So I think part of that, and what you've so beautifully said throughout this interview, is that if we are going to get it right, alongside that, we've got to make a couple of commitments. One is to self-scrutiny, and I mean that both on an organisational level, but also at that individual practice level. And secondly, that once we've asked the questions, that we're willing to then move forward and actually respond with meaningful change. And that does take accountability.
Yeah. And it's not a short-term thing. It's not a silver bullet, but I think having that, you know, way of thinking in your DNA and just kind of always putting that lens on. But you're right, like, I mean, the organization has to reflect what they are, you know, so then it mirrors what the community, so it's like, you know, organization has to reflect the communities that they serve in both the decision-making table, how they operate, etc., because then it's like, you know, true to the values and alignment. But yeah, you're right. I think it's not a silver bullet. It's not simple. It's complex, but that doesn't. And sometimes, because when things get complex, they get put in the too hard basket. But I mean, no one in this world fits in one box. So we all have intersecting realities every single day. So this concept impacts everyone. So so policies, etc., the way we do things every day need to reflect that. And it's not about adding complexity by the sake of, because for the sake of it, because, you know, as I said, complexity, it exists in our lives every day. So it's and
I mean, I quoted Audre Lorde, I think, in the last session, and of course, you know, I'm probably paraphrasing, but Audre Lorde's comment, a Black activist, her comment was, we don't live our lives in single issue ways. So why would we think that we do? Why would we think that intersectionality is probably one of the most applicable and real theories and applications, like in a real sense? We do not live our lives in single issue ways. But just on that point of accountability, before we do wrap up, one of the things that, you know, does disturb me from time to time is we tend to talk about gender equality and we apply an intersectional lens, and we really appreciate how race, culture, ethnicity, faith kind of impact on the way that gender as a category, as a social category, plays itself out. But a disturbing trend I am seeing is the exclusionary nature in which gender has come to mean that it's not inclusive of our trans sisters. You know, we don't necessarily want to talk about how it might apply to the LGBTI community. And one of the things that SCOA is doing, I think, is to say we've got to get real about inclusion. When we use concepts and policies and frameworks like that, we mean everyone.
Yes.
Can I just ask, in terms of AMWA's application of this framework, I am assuming, knowing the organisation as I do and knowing your deep commitment to these conversations, that when we use terms like gender and women, that we are coming at it through an inclusionary lens.
Definitely, yes. I think that's very, very important. Like, we just want to make sure that everyone who identifies, self-identifies, is included, and also, as I said, we need allies as well. But yes, aligned with SCOA's approach. But yeah, I think that, like, you know, when we take an intersectional approach, it's also like, you know, you're not, people who don't think it applies to them, like they're not being excluded, because if we create solutions that are equitable, then it benefits us all. So everyone's winning out of taking the extra time to make something fit for purpose, that's more efficient, etc., more effective and more inclusive. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Maria. Really important. Yeah, so much has been shared, so much valuable, really, insights for our members and everyone listening. We do have to wrap up, so thank you so much, Melanie, for for joining us, for taking the time to do this, and yeah, for everything that you've shared.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We love your work.
We love your work too.
Thank you. Bye. Ooh.